This is the nature of things. In the last few decades, we have learned an enormous amount about the innermost workings of our cells. That new knowledge holds great potential, but it's also meant that our own biology may have acquired unexpected value. Human tissues, cells, and genes are now the object of investment and global trade. This market helps finance important research. Who can doubt that it has led to almost miraculous new cures? But there are hidden costs. Over the last decade, many of the laws regulating the use of human tissues have all but vanished. And you may be surprised to find out who owns your genetic heritage. Who owns our cells, our genes? Where do we draw the line between a thing and a person? What does it mean to be human in the 21st century? Troubling questions, and as you'll discover, disturbing answers. Treaties and laws have decreed that no one may sell, purchase, or profit from the human body. In much of the world, trade in human organs has been outlawed. But the law is not so clear when it comes to the tissues, cells, and genes that make up these organs. How deeply should we allow market forces to reach into our bodies? If we don't allow the sale of human organs, should it be legal to trade in the cells and the genes that make our bodies what they are? Human tissues removed during operations, blood tests, biopsies, and routine medical examinations don't necessarily end up in the trash. Our flesh and blood have become biological resources, and who hasn't given some of their body into the keeping of others? Liquid or solid, healthy or sick, little bits of our bodies will survive us. But who owns these human fragments? The patient from whom they were taken? The scientist who will use them? The pharmaceutical company paying for the research? Our need for answers to these questions is urgent, but they aren't new. They've been asked for decades. 30 years ago, they made headlines with the case of John Moore. His cells promised to be a gold mine for someone, and he wanted some say in the matter.
The new and extraordinary science of biogenetics may redesign the makeup of mankind. But as scientists pursue these goals and the wealth that may come with them, are they balancing the progress of science with the morals of humanity? That's a question raised in the story of John Moore, a man claiming his place in this future world.
In 1976, John Moore, who was suffering from a rare and deadly form of leukemia, had his spleen removed in a Los Angeles hospital. The operation may have saved his life. Cells from his spleen were cultured, and the doctor who examined them, David Goldie, discovered that they produced an enormous amount of a hormone, CSF, that could be used in cancer treatment. Dr. Goldie understood the therapeutic and financial possibilities of these golden cells. He decided to put his patient to work. For nearly 7 years, Moore underwent tests of all kinds. Only when his doctor asked him to sign a release for the use of his cells did Moore understand that the procedures he was undergoing had little to do with his welfare.
Who's going to argue with their doctor about over-signing a form when you're on the operating table and your life is in danger?
And if you can't trust your doctor, who can you trust?
This is true. But I ask things in the nature of is there going to be any commercial value in this down the road? What kinds of things are you developing out of this? The answer usually was always no, or it's something for the future, it's way down the road, as you know, there's really nothing of immediate impact happening.
Behind the scenes, a pharmaceutical laboratory was investing heavily in Moore's cells. The doctor's goal, by then he had teamed up with the brilliant Harvard biologist Tom Maniatis, was to transform these cells into medicine.
So the spleen was then broken apart into individual cells and was cultured in a dish using growth factors and media. And this process required a tremendous amount of skill and years, actually, to establish individual lines. What Goldie then ultimately did is to take a single cell and then to amplify that. And so now we had a series of cells that were identical to each other, originating from one cell, and this is called a cell line. And then characterized these cell lines and found that one of them, the MO cell line, had this incredible ability to produce large amounts of proteins that were of medical importance, and one of them was GM-CSF.
John Moore's cells provided raw materials needed to create a biological machine that would produce the protein that interested the pharmaceutical company. The trick was to get them to produce GM-CSF in sufficient quantity.
Introduce that into another cell line that produced large amounts of GM-CSF. So a tiny amount's being made here, and a huge amount is being made here. And this then is used as a starting point for developing a drug to treat cancer patients. And this, the name of this drug was called Leukomax.
John Moore's cells provided a kind of shortcut. Without them, doctors would have needed thousands of liters of blood to identify CSF and years before they could replicate the hormone. Dr. Goldie and Tom Maniatis were pioneers. Their work was an important milestone in biotechnology.
This is where we keep our tissue culture supplies, and all of the components need to grow cells are here. Yes, this is the Leukomax that is used in patients to treat cancer.
In 1984, John Moore began a legal action challenging the patent application. This was the first time a court was asked to decide who owns the elements of the human body.
The question is not so much, are we a resource? I think we are. I mean, mothers breastfeed their children, people give blood, people give organs. We understand that our body can be useful in society and for others. The question is, how far do we go in recognizing that while we want to be useful, we want to participate, we don't want to exploit.
Do you own your own blood or any of the body parts that are taken from you in the hospital during surgery or any other kind of medical procedure? Well, you may think you do, but I'll tell you what, you may not. Our first two guests are here to discuss what may be one of the most interesting milestone legal cases taking place in the 80s this morning. John Moore and his attorney from Los Angeles, Jonathan Zaki.
I didn't know any of this stuff until after we got into the discovery mode and ascertained that the doctor had already taken out patents. The university had patents on
UCLA.
myself, UCLA, that they had entered into contracts with Genetics Institute, a large bioengineering firm out on the East Coast, that they were developing relationships with Sandoz Pharmaceuticals.
International pharmaceutical
massive
company.
Contracts and contractual relationships. And
You were becoming a worldwide business and you didn't know it.
I didn't know. I had no idea at all. It was such a total shock to me.
Did John Moore have the right to benefit from the sales of this drug? Everyone sensed that this trial would help decide what the relations would be between patients, researchers, and the pharmaceutical industry.
The John Moore case was a very dramatic instance where an individual's in this case blood cells, were very valuable in and of themselves, which was a very rare thing. Maybe only 5 or 6 people in the history of medicine are in that position. He wasn't treated fairly, and he felt that he had been misled as to why he was undergoing certain medical procedures. And especially if you think that your life is in danger, and then you find out later that instead of being treated, you were being mined. This made the John Moore case a very symbolic case of how do we treat people when we need their blood or tissue for research. And he raised the question, if the doctor knows that my blood cells are valuable, why don't I get some of the value? The people who do the research on the tissue for drug development may discover something that's very valuable in a tumor or in a blood cell. And they may develop a drug that attacks that tumor. And they may make millions of dollars from doing that. So the person at the research discovery end may make a lot of money, and the patient has no claim to any of that. So as long as we have a capitalist system of drug discovery and the government's not funding all of it, people aren't going to do it if they can't make money. But they also spend millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars, in creating the infrastructure to turn tissue and blood into medical breakthroughs. And that is why they are also the ones to profit from it.
Who did the golden cells belong to? Researchers argued that the work and investment needed to modify his cells gave them the right to patent what had been his genetic heritage. On July 10, 1990, after a legal process lasting 7 years, the justice system was about to have its say.
The crux of the John Moore case is that a patient owns his own body, his own tissues, his own DNA.
The California Supreme Court disagreed, saying what happened to Moore might be unethical, but it wasn't illegal. People have no property rights to their own bodies. Moore spent the next decade fighting for patients' rights before he died last year.
Ironically, Leukomax, the product made from Moore's cells, wasn't the expected gold mine. A competing drug took the lion's share of the market. But this wasn't the end of the saga of his now patented cells.
So the John Moore cell line, called MO, is maintained in a repository of frozen cells in Washington. And this repository has many thousands of cells from all sorts of organisms, from humans, from mice, from rats. And these cells are used for research. And so you can actually find these cells online and order them. And so you can buy this for $330. When you receive them, you thaw them out and can grow them in a tissue culture.
John Moore's medical saga began just over 30 years ago. The story of how, without his knowledge or agreement, his cells were turned into someone else's property is as shocking and disturbing today as it was when it first made the headlines. However, as you'll find out after the break, things haven't stood still. And if anything, the stakes are higher than ever. Our earliest use of living organisms for medical purposes lies buried in prehistory. But thanks to the modern biotech revolution, medicine made from living cells has gained a new importance. And by becoming raw material for the pharmaceutical industry, the human body has taken on new status. It's now in the focus of the sometimes contradictory pull of business, ethics, and health. The conflict over the man with the golden cells is more relevant than ever. Laurie Andrews was a consultant during the John Moore trial. Today, she's a professor at Chicago-Kent College of Law.
For the past 25 years, I've been haunted by the John Moore case. If they had recognized a patient's right to control what's done with his tissue, many of the abuses that we've seen today would not occur, because researchers are treating people like commodities. In fact, in that case, the legal position I took was to argue only that he should have a right to informed consent and to be able to have the doctor have a fiduciary duty to act in a way that did not harm the patient. I didn't argue the property aspect of it because I was worried that the criticism would be that people are just in it for the money. And the court really didn't intend that to happen. They really thought they were protecting the patient in some way. They felt that they didn't want to see the important human body trivialized in some way. They were worried about the haunting of the image of slavery in our country, where bodies were sold for profit. And so they thought they were adding dignity to a person by not holding that a tissue could be property. What's happened now, though, is totally unjust. What is said is that the tissue, the genes, can't be property of the person from whom they came, but can be property of the researcher. So it's not that we don't have a commercial system. We have one, but it's just the property is given to the wrong individual.
The court's decision in the Moore case didn't halt the trade in the human body. Quite the contrary. We give our tissues, cells, genes, and blood samples over to a system that is free to turn them into commodities.
A patent is a grant between the government and an inventor that allows the inventor to exclude others from making and using his invention for up to 20 years. In exchange for that grant, the public is given the full written description of what the invention is with an enabling disclosure that allows one of ordinary skill in the art to reproduce that invention. The one thing that is excluded from patentable subject matter is human beings. The Patent and Trademark Office does not issue patents on human beings. However, anything else made by the hand of man, whether it be a transgenic animal, whether it be a plant, or whether it be an extract from a human plant or an animal. And that includes DNA, it includes enzymes, it includes proteins. It includes cell lines, such as embryonic cells. It includes immortal cell lines that we use in the diagnostics of diseases. It must be something that was taken from nature in a purified form that has a specific, substantial, and credible utility.
Pat Mooney is director of a group concerned with the social and environmental impact of new technologies.
In a new field like we're dealing with here in terms of human genomics, it's natural to get in fast with the biggest possible patents. Companies normally and logically would say, this is sort of the Wild West. We don't know what's happening here. It's our chance to try to make claims, sweeping claims with patents the patent examiners won't pay attention to, won't realize the implications of the claim because it's too new a field for them, so they may get away with murder. It's like prospectors making claims over gold fields. They make the biggest possible land claim they can possibly make in the hopes that they'll have something at the end of the day.
If a gene can be some laboratory's private property, is the human body still something special, something sacred? Or should it be treated like any other commodity?
How many patented genes are there now? Probably between 5,000 and 6,000. We know that of the 30,000 human genes, almost 3/4 of them are in the process of being patented directly or indirectly. Within 4 or 5 years, this will solve an issue raised by a lot of people. Are human genes patentable? It'll no longer be a question. They'll all have been patented.
And in this rapidly changing high-stakes game, understanding who owns what is not always easy.
We're not sure how many patents there are related to the human body. But we and many others have been trying to sort through the maze of patents that are out there. And companies are getting better and better at hiding their tracks. It's harder to see what is being patented, what its purpose is it the same material over and over again, or what's going on there. But as best as researchers have been able to sort it out at this stage, it looks like about 2/3 of all of the human-related patents that exist, the genomic patents that exist, the gene patents that exist related to human beings, 2/3 of that material is actually owned by 3 companies.
To hold the patent on a gene means you can control how it is used, even when it comes to questions of public health. In 2001, Myriad Genetics used its ownership of 2 gene patents to take out another patent in Canada and Europe. This new one was to detect the predisposition to a certain kind of breast cancer. Even though other laboratories had provided much of the work to identify those genes, the new patent holder held the right to potentially life-saving tests. In Europe and Canada, Myriad's claims were challenged. Myriad alleged that their patents were being infringed when Canadian tests were performed at publicly funded labs. In 2001, Ontario rejected Myriad's demands to do the testing at 2 or 3 times the cost. In Europe, their patents were revoked and the genes re-entered the public domain. But despite the controversy, Myriad seems to have struck gold. By 2006, they had sold more than 100,000 tests at a cost of $3,000 each.
Once you've allowed for microbial patenting, you really leave the door open to virtually any part of human genetic material or other living material can be patented. And once you've allowed, of course, for the patenting of matter, which is a natural part of patent law, compositions of matter are patentable material. Once you've allowed for that, then you also allow for the patenting of the building blocks of life itself, the actual atomic material that builds DNA. We need to remember that, of course, DNA is really nothing more than hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon. A bit of sugar thrown in, that's the building block of life. So if you allow for the manipulation of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon and some sugars, then you are allowing the patenting of the building blocks of life and of humans.
I believe the patent system's not at all a bad system. I think it really can advance research. But the system becomes bad when the balance is upset between knowledge, that is, making an invention available in the public domain, and granting patents via its patent rights. And when that balance is upset, it doesn't work. That's what happened in the Myriad Genetics affair. The balance was upset from the outset, since they were claiming a monopoly. And it's odd that they would claim that monopoly. I think that if they had licensed it fairly broadly, at a very low cost, no one would have reacted.
Over the centuries, our exploration of the human body has constantly changed scale. From organs to tissue, from tissue to cells, from cells to DNA and genes. We have refined our vision of the parts, but perhaps at the cost of losing sight of the whole. Far from their patients, it's easy for doctors and researchers to find themselves working in the maze of brilliant and complex abstractions. Reduced to their genetic code, patients become a series of 4 letters, A, T, G, and C, the initials of the molecules that spell out information in the DNA. And in this fragmentation, we fear losing whatever it was that made our bodies more than simply the stuff of industry and commerce.
Hey, long time no see.
There's a web of commercial relations as prosaic as any other, but this one trades in the very substance of human life. There are companies that have specialized in trading human tissues. They have become the middlemen between the research laboratories and the hospitals that provide the raw materials. It's the simplest of economics, supply and demand.
Well, guys, we got another one. That's the Zeptometrics bell. We ring that every time we get a new contract. Zeptometrics Corporation is a large biorepository. We house here millions of human clinical specimens that are used for medical research. A lot of these materials first start out as a raw material, which we would call a plasma unit. The plasma units are collected by plasma fractionators, and they're used for making a number of medical products. In this case here, this represents an HIV seroconversion donor. We also have well over 1 million clinical specimens in our archive from a wide range of diseases relating to autoimmune, infectious diseases, and many, many cancers that are all inventoried by type, completely anonymized, with a barcode reference back to our database system. These are the samples that we would then pull out, ship to clients, and then they would use these for their medical research.
Medical research is important to all of us, and it certainly makes sense to apply our best technologies and best business practices to encouraging such a vital activity. But as we'll see, all too often corporate interests are not always the interests of society as a whole. There's a booming global industry responding to the growing medical and research needs for human biological materials.
Human specimens, including tissues, serum, plasma, viable cells, any other biological fluids, are products. It's a very specialized product, so you cannot just get it off a shelf and sell in a supermarket, but you have a customer who comes to you and tells you, I would like to get this type of specimens prepared to these specifications, frozen or fixed and paraffin embedded or prepared in a special media. We're asked by many organizations and many people, what is your major business activity? And after some consideration, I decided to answer, it's a project management. So what we do, we identify the need with the customer in the United States or Western Europe or even Eastern Europe. We find the source to fulfill this need, and it's our procurement centers back in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So since this product doesn't have price, human tissues are not priceable, they're worth zero. But the work behind those tissues, it's very extensive. So then we charge our customers for selling those products to them. We're charging them for our work, basically.
Rightly or wrongly, many of us feel our sense of decency offended by the idea that our bodies, or parts of our bodies, can be treated as merchandise. It's one reason why only services such as processing, conservation, and transport can be billed. Consider the worldwide network that stores umbilical cord blood, supplied thanks to the goodwill of anonymous donors. Some countries also allow private companies to charge for the storage of an infant's umbilical cord blood in case of some future health calamity. The interest in cord blood centers on its usefulness in treating a range of serious blood, bone, genetic, and immune disorders. France, where the first transplant with umbilical cord blood was performed in 1988, was one of 2 countries to outlaw private cord blood repositories. On the other hand, they didn't provide sufficient funding for the collection of umbilical cord blood or its storage. As a result, France quickly reached a situation where they have to pay for the import of cord blood that was voluntarily donated in other countries. Most types of cells are specialized in only one function and generate only more cells of the same kind. Stem cells are powerful because they can grow into a variety of different cells. Those found in cord blood have proved to be real lifesavers. They can become red or white blood cells, or even specialized clotting cells. The use of umbilical cord blood raises no ethical problems in itself. But some say that the commercial maneuvering around the blood supply does pose concerns. Private biobanks offer parents the chance to have their child's blood stored in case they may need it in the future.
After the baby has been delivered, the doctor uses the blood bag supplied by CordLife to collect the blood from the umbilical cord.
The claim is that one day, the stem cells in this umbilical cord blood will be able to treat many more disorders than they can right now.
In the future, more diseases may be treated, including spinal cord injury, heart disease, cystic fibrosis, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease.
The Singapore-based company CordLife is a big player in this market.
If you are due within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we strongly recommend you contact us immediately to ensure all necessary steps are undertaken in time for your delivery.
What you see here are collection boxes. Every month we collect roughly about 200 samples from parents who are expecting. The cost of this service is 1,400 Singapore dollars, which is roughly about 700 euro or 900 US. This covers all the costs in the first year. Doctor's fees, hospital's fees, processing fees, testing fees, everything. And then there's a 250 a year annual storage fee from the second year onwards. The cord blood unit is stored with us for a contract of 21 years. And no, the blood doesn't last just 21 years. In theory, the blood, if properly stored in a facility such as this, it can last forever. In the future, it might be entirely possible that the cord blood unit becomes a precious heirloom that is passed from one generation to the next.
It's estimated that 750,000 umbilical cords have been stored in private banks around the world. That's 3 times more than in public banks. Will they be useful one day? No one knows. The dream is that we will eventually learn to coax the cells stored here into becoming any kind of cell we need. But the use of those stem cells is fraught with ethical problems.
Stem cells are cells that have the capacity to differentiate and become some set of differentiated cells. The problem is very few cells can develop into all the possible cells of a human body. An egg, fertilized egg, is the ultimate stem cell. It can become every cell in a body.
A potential person for some. A mass of cells for others. These are murky waters ethically and legally.
The embryo is right here.
Countries vary greatly when it comes to laws controlling the use of embryos. In Canada, there are rules forbidding the creation of embryos for research purposes. But unused embryos, originally frozen or collected for reproductive reasons, are a very different matter. Ethical arguments aside, these fertilized eggs are unique in a biological sense.
Everybody who can listen to what I'm saying now started out as an egg. We were all fertilized eggs at one time. And if you think about all the complex cells that are in your body, all of those cells are really descendants of this one circular, undifferentiated globe of an egg. And this room is filled with tanks of frozen embryos stored, many of them waiting for their prospective parents to come back and use those embryos. Some of them will never be used for people for their reproductive purposes, and they will be donated for research like the embryonic stem cell research that we're talking about.
The human embryo An infinitely precious resource, perhaps, but certainly not a rare one. There may be as many as 2 million frozen embryos around the world. It's been estimated that only a few hundred of them have been used for research purposes. That's because it's not the embryo that's at the center of this research. They are the means to an end. They are the key, for the moment at least, to the most powerful kind of stem cells. These 3 to 5 day old embryos will be cultured and transformed into stem cell lines. It's the embryo's status as the undifferentiated beginning of all human life that makes it so potentially powerful and so socially, ethically, and politically contentious. Nearly every country has regulated the use of embryonic stem cells in some way. But these laws, regulations, and accords are not written in stone. The financial rewards of this kind of research are potentially enormous. And where there's so much money riding on the outcome, it's all too easy for ethical and social concerns to fall on deaf ears. You may be more than a little surprised when you discover the extent and depth of the research that's underway right now. When it comes to biotech, Singapore is the promised land. The government is investing directly and massively in private companies, and it's attracted scientists from around the world.
I feel very comfortable with the work that we do that involves the use of surplus in vitro fertilization embryos to make a limited number of human embryonic stem cell lines because our objective in using those lines is to cure sickness and illness in humans.
The scientists here are among the front runners in this research. They're already working on the clinical applications of stem cell research.
Sachin, can you please handle over the cells?
In this case, the research is focused on cardiomyocytes, heart muscle cells.
Oh, thank you very much.
The goal of this work is to replace cardiac tissue that's been damaged by a heart attack.
So, let's see whether we can find some beating embryo bodies here.
Stem cells that have not yet learned to become a particular part of the body are being taught to become heart tissue.
Okay, so what we can see here is a nice little clump of differentiated human embryonic stem cells. And you can see that this clump is slowly contracting. So now, why is it contracting? What we have used is the expanded human embryonic stem cells, and then we have used a specific protocol that we have developed here at Embryonic Stem Cells International to drive them towards a cardiac differentiation. Because what we finally want to use in the clinic is cardiomyocytes. So we test them first in animal experiments. We inject them in the heart and we test whether they improve the heart function in these animal models. And in the next stage then, we will finally try them in clinical trials where we'd like to support and to replace the loss of cardiomyocytes in a human heart, for example, after a myocardial infarction. So that's the final goal.
One day, this tiny cluster of cells may repair someone's heart. Though this kind of regenerative medicine is only a dream for the time being, it's inspiring financial investments equal to the hope it represents.
I think one interesting question is, why are all these countries spending so much energy and money in biomedicine? Is it simply because of the economics? I don't think so. I think what's happening here is that biomedicine is part of the expectation of the population. Just as much as energy was the expectation of populations to have a warm house, which 300 years ago, you didn't expect to have a warm house. You were lucky to have a warm house. Now everybody expects your house to have a heater that generates energy. Right now, in the progress of humanity, we all expect health. Part of our expectation is actually to take this science and make ourselves healthier, make ourselves more productive, to live longer and to live better lives.
Of course, everyone will agree they want a better life. But what does that mean? One thing is for certain, not all costs can be calculated in dollars. In a world of conflicting values, where will we anchor our decisions about what research should or should not be permitted?
For me, human dignity is not a right. For me, human dignity is the foundation of all the other rights, the privacy, the autonomy, the solidarity, security of the individual, and so on, integrity. For me, dignity is not in between all these other rights. You cannot have these other rights given to human persons if the fact that human persons are not recognized as having dignity. What is the limit to the freedom of research in the absence of a law saying you must not do this or that in a criminal sense? And not, to me, human dignity then is the ultimate arbiter, the ultimate limit of the freedom of research.
These deepening explorations of the innermost secrets of our cells and genes are making us think about ourselves in new ways. Like it or not, we are being forced to reassess what makes us us. More than 45 years ago, as a geneticist, I began to speak out about moral and ethical questions that were bound to crop up from cloning, genetic engineering, and fetal intervention. But other scientists chastised me because they felt these issues were a long way off and I would frighten the public unnecessarily. Well, advances in genetics, biotechnology, and embryonic and fetal manipulation have simply exploded beyond anything we ever dreamed was possible back then. Today, corporations rush to patent all parts and forms of life and trumpet the potential benefits of biotechnology while downplaying or ignoring possible hazards. They just want to make money. But long before we actually start applying new techniques and products, shouldn't we have wide public talks about their repercussions? After all, innovations in biology make us question the very definition of life, what it means to be human, and how far we will go in trying to make over ourselves and the rest of the world.
Next time.
A lot of travellers are looking to find an alternative to flying, but something, if you like, that rekindles the romance of travel 20, 30 years ago.
Fast, sexy, environmentally smart, and an economic boon too. A new high-speed service set to launch in southeast England is revitalizing an entire region.
I'm Christopher Hume. I'm standing here in front of Union Station. What I want to know is why don't we have something like this in Canada so that I can go from Toronto to Montreal or to Ottawa or to New York just as fast as this train does.
From super-fast trains to the mysteries of the universe.
Ever since history began, we know that people have been wondering about how matter is made, how the universe began, what's going to happen to the universe in the future.
Just how those first particles arose to eventually create all this stuff, no one knows.
This question might be answered by what some researchers are calling the God particle. If it exists, this is the machine that will find it.
If they blow a hole in my backyard.
Sarah Harmer talks to David Suzuki about her personal activism. Next time, the first edition of The Nature of Things magazine.
What the movement in terms of climate change, for example, needs is a powerful anthem.
I'll work on it.
Enter our 4th Nature in Focus contest. Send us your photos and you could win a grand prize trip to Quebec City. Winning photos will be published in Harold Smith Country Life magazine. Or you could win a Nikon camera. Visit our website.
A deep taboo for generations, sex is now exploding in China. 1 billion libidos are finding new freedom. China's sexual revolution. Doc Zone, next.
Put the remote control down.
This is the place.
We want to introduce you to people perhaps you don't know about, but maybe you should.
This is The Hour, Monday at 11 on CBC.
An all-new Doc Zone starts now on CBC.